Okay, AP gentlemen, I wanted to make a brief video to explain an idea that was mentioned in a webinar I had to watch last night about what your test day experience would be like. And they mentioned this teacher who had came up with this proposal for a different way to approach the DBQ. I reached out to him for more information. He sent me some of the work he had, and I figured it'd be better before we went into that more in detail with examples and such, for me to explain the concept and look at the rubric as I explain it. Because without kind of showing you the score system and such and the details of that, at first glance it might seem like an act of desperation. So this guy calls it his DBQ Plan B. I, being a chess person, have decided that I will refer to it as the 2 Doc Gambit. For those of you who don't know, a gambit is a chess term for when you offer. You basically are throwing bait out there, right? You're trying to lure a person into making a move that you want them to move. But it's a risk because they can always deny the gambit, right? And then you are in a position you might not necessarily want to be in. So I'm going to call this the 2 Doc Gambit. And it's based around the concept of you will focus on 2 documents only. Now, I want to start out before we discuss this, before you decide I'm listening to every word you say and this is all I'm going to do. I would say that this is going to be a good idea if you are a person who, A, struggles with time. Every time you feel like you're racing, you're not able to do the right amount of work or detail or investigation into the documents, and you're just sort of throwing out all kinds of Hail Marys. If you're the kind of person who feels crunched for time every time you do a DBQ, this might be for you. Okay? This might be for you. If you're the kind of person who you've done 7 or 8 practice DBQs, and every single time you fail to get this, the 4 document support point, this might be for you. Okay? Now, I'm going to put a disclaimer, several disclaimers. This is the first of them. You cannot get a perfect score with this. You are throwing away guaranteed 1 point possible. The best score you can get doing this is a 9. Right? And that is probably why it never occurred to me. It's not in my nature to kind of aim for anything less than a perfect score for my students on the AP. I realize they're not all going to get perfect scores in the AP, but that is a goal that I aim for. And so I design the preparation and teaching with that in mind. It's not in my nature to go, oh, we're going to get what we can get and see what happens. Which is somewhat strange because for years that was basically how I designed my track roster. Because I didn't always have the weapons or tools necessary to, let's say, win every event. So I would focus on the events I knew we could win, and the ones we couldn't win, we'd do the best we could do and hope it all worked out in the end. And this is kind of that approach. You're saying to yourself, I can't get a 10. I most likely can't get a 10. Right? I would love to get a 10, but I can't get a 10. But I can get close to a 10, right? All right, so let's work through this a little. Thesis, nothing changes, right? Every essay has to have a thesis. You're already having to put a thesis. If you use all 5 documents, you still have to put a thesis, right? Context, again, you got to put that in there. Let's skip the evidence for a moment. Evidence beyond the documents. You've got to put evidence, you've got to put that outside information, right? Those outside examples. And as I talked about previously, you have to put a second outside evidence. It used to be you only needed 1, but to make this a 10-point rubric, they've added this additional outside evidence. You have to explain the historical situation or purpose or viewpoint of a document. You actually have to do it for 2 documents, right? For those of you wondering, on the old rubric, you had to do 3 of the 7, right? But again, because of the changes, they've made it to where you get a point every time you do it, up to 2. And then there's that final complex understanding point. Nothing has changed about this. It's the same thing where you've got to write an essay that somehow ties it to another time period or looks at varying viewpoints or nuances or whatever. Okay. Now, let's go up here. I need to explain, to describe what is in two documents. I've got to use two documents to support my thesis. And then I have to use four documents. I have to describe and use them to support my argument. Four of the documents. Now, if you think about it, so far in this DBQ rubric, I have said you need two documents, two examples, but these aren't documents, beyond the documents, right? So you need two documents. You need two documents. The only time on the entire rubric where you need more than two documents is this one point. That one solitary point. So, if you choose to only use two documents on your entire DBQ essay, you could score a 9. It is possible. Let's be realistic, you probably wouldn't. You could probably score an 8 because the odds are you're going to struggle to get this point. It's not guaranteed, but you're probably going to struggle, and let's be honest, that's a point that a lot of students struggle on to get regardless of how many documents that they use. This is the point that's not the most clear cut, right? And so most of you are struggling to get this point, usually. So you could still get them, right? Especially if you were to connect it to a different time period, you know, the whole continuity or change, or, you know, time periods, whatever, different regions. So all that in mind, if you take two documents, okay, and you knock it out the park, I mean, you describe the document well, you tie it very solidly to your thesis, and then you find a way to explain the point of view, the bias, the situation, the audience, the purpose, right? However you want to term it. This guy calls it the HAP factor, which I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's something like historical situation, audience, purpose, or point of view. That was it. There you go. Look at me using my resources. He calls it the HAP point. Historical situation, audience, purpose, point of view. If you can do that, you get these 2 points, right? So you've only used two documents. If you do everything right, you can get thesis, context, this evidence point, that evidence point. You will not get this point. Now let's just for fun say you don't even try to bring in outside information, okay? You can get this point, and let's be honest, you're not going to get this point, all right? So right there, you've earned 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You have a 6. If you use two documents and you just crush two documents, you write a thesis, a good intro, you write a good intro that has the context, you have a thesis up there, then you take two documents and you just, sell it on two documents and two documents alone. And you don't bring anything else in the entire universe into your essay. You can get a 6 out of 10. Now, I'm not saying that's a passing score. I don't know what a passing score is going to be. If you want to know my honest thought, I think a 6 will be a 3. Okay. Again, I do not work for College Board. I am not an AP reader or grader or anything. No one has given me a phone call. But I would assume that a 6 will be a passing score. Okay. I don't know if it'll be a mid-range 3 or a borderline 3. I can't tell you that. But I'm pretty sure a 6 is going to pass the AP test this year. Okay. 6 on this DBQ. And so right there you got it, because you got thesis, context, 2 of the evidence points, and then the 2 analysis and reasoning points that come from, looking at the document's purpose, point of view, historical situation, etc. Now, you want to add to that 6? You want to really lock in a 3? Throw in some outside evidence, right? Throw in one piece of additional evidence. You want to make it an 8? Throw in another, right? And now we get into, obviously, I want to get a 9. All right, well, that's going to be a little trickier. And depending on the prompt, I keep saying it's trickier. It depends on the prompt, depends on the question. We all know that. If it's a topic you know a lot about, you might be able to work in some nuances. If it's something that you see repeating in history, or that there's one off the top of your head you can think about from another time period, and you could throw that in the final paragraph, you could do it. Okay? So you could, I feel, very easily get a 7 or an 8. Now, I will point out there is a few positives to this and a few negatives. So before you run out and buy this plan, so to speak, let's start with the positives. The positives are, you need to find 2 out of 5 documents that you can crush. That's pretty good, actually, if you think about it. This is allowing you to look at 3 of the documents and go, yeah, I don't want to use that. Yeah, I don't want to. It's letting you be a little more selective. This 4 document requirement basically kind of ties your hands. You got to basically use them all. This one allows you to be a little more selective and only use the documents you feel most strongly about, most comfortable about. Okay? This, in a way, makes this a little easier for 2 reasons. One, you've got more time. Because you're only spending time on 2 documents and you're not trying to weave in more documents, you've got time to worry about outside evidence a little more, which I think will allow some of you the time to develop it more. A lot of you are making the mistake of, there's outside evidence, but it's this fleeting glimmer, right? I was grading essays that I gave AP American History, and it was about imperialism, and several students are like, this is just like white man's burden. And then they went on. That's not going to get you outside evidence. You made some fleeting reference, right? It's got to be more than a phrase or reference. You can't just name drop white man's burden and then run off. You got to explain to me, right? You got to give me 2 or 3 sentences where you flesh out, this is emblematic of the concept of white man's burden, the sort of, social Darwinism, Anglo-Saxonism, racist ideology that had become prevalent in Europe, and 2 or 3 sentences where you explain to me what this is, connect it to the prompt. You got plenty of time to do that now, because you're not racing to get 4 documents into this thing. You got time, okay? So for some of you, you will find that this point, which might have eluded you previously, now becomes easier. And because you're not sitting there trying to like magically make all these nuanced connections and segues, because I think that's the other thing for kids. It's awkward to just magically throw random nuggets in there. You got more space to do it. You could make a paragraph. You could make another paragraph where you do these 2. 5 or 6 sentence paragraph where another example of this at play during this time period would be, and another, there you go. I apologize for saying so you're going to have more time overall because you're spending less time with document analysis. So you have more time to hit some of the other things that you might have been struggling to find time to do, including this closing paragraph, where a lot of you are trying to connect it to another time period or another region. You're going to have more time to work with this. Here are the negatives. As I said, you are throwing away a point. So you're starting out with a 9 out of 10. Okay? So every point is a little more important. Another issue with this. If you mess up on a document, if you swing and you miss, you are done. I'm going to say this right now. If you make a glaring error in this approach, you will not pass the AP test. Because follow me. You have 2 documents. One of them, you knock it out of the park. But the other one, you screw up bad. You get confused, right? You get all twisted and jumbled. You misinterpret it. You get confused on who the author is. And you start talking about all these aspects of, I'm going to go ahead and go back to American history for a moment. It's a document written by Teddy Roosevelt. and you start talking about this is, typified by his policies in the New Deal, and this is typified by his good neighbor policy towards Latin America, and this is that, and you are confusing FDR and Teddy Roosevelt. Whoopsie. Okay? So you totally swing and miss on that document. All right, so you had a great thesis. You had outstanding context. You did a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful job of hitting one of your documents out of the park. All right? Let's go ahead and say you have outside info. Let's say you did a stellar job there. All right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. But look what happens. You only did it accurately on one document. You don't get that point. Only one document. You don't get that point. And you failed to adequately describe this to do the historical situation, purpose, audience point. So you don't get that point. You get a 5. If you do this gambit, as I'm calling it, and you only accurately describe one document, if you only do it properly on one of your documents and you totally flub the other one, you're now down to a 5. Your absolute maximum score, well, no, I shouldn't say that. You're down to a 7. You're down to a 7 or 6, excuse me, 6. I apologize. You're down to a 6. But let's be honest, guys. If you totally flub that other point, I don't think you're going to get this one. I'm just going to be very honest with you. But let's just go ahead and say you did. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You're up to a 6. And that's if you did everything else perfectly, right? And I don't feel like that's going to happen. If you screwed up a document that badly, the idea that you're going to somehow develop this incredibly wonderful connection or something, I just don't think it's going to happen. So the negatives of this are you are leaving yourself very little room for error. You are making every point that much more critical. And I feel like this is another negative. You have to decide this going in. Right? You look at the prompt, you look at the documents, and you decide whether you're going to go traditional, I'm going to go for the perfect and use all the documents, or I'm going to run, the 2 doc gambit. I feel like this is, now some of you might say, I'm going to do 3 docs. I got room. I can do 3. I can do 3. I can't do all 4 or 5 or whatever, but I can do 3. All right. And that's what I would suggest. If you can do 3 documents, if you can crush 3 documents, or you feel like you can crush one and there are 2 of them that you feel pretty good about, but you're not completely sold and you're not sure that you're going to completely get this on. All right, fine, 3. All right. I would say doing 3 documents instead of just 2 might be a better course. It still leaves you more time, in my opinion. It's still saving you time to perhaps have a closing that connects to this point. It gives you a little bit of wiggle room. But I wanted to go ahead and before I started sending out exemplars or documents about this or writing examples, I wanted to take a moment to take the rubric and kind of walk you through the thinking here of why this might work. And again, I emphasize might. Please do not take this as the solution to all your DBQ problems, right? And for those of you who, of course, are worried about the fact that these practice ones count for grades, and you're like, I want to get the highest score humanly possible, you are guaranteeing you will not get a 10 out of 10. So I want to make sure that was clear too. But I do think that approaching the DBQ with a different mindset of instead of scoring a 10, I'm going to aim for a 9, and using the tools necessary to aim for a 9, you could have great success and get a passing score. You could even get a score that'll earn you a 4. I don't know what an 8 is going to get you. I don't know what an 8 is going to get. I would feel like an 8 might be a 4. Again, I can't extrapolate from the old DBQs. to get back to a time period where we had a DBQ rubric that was different from the 7-point rubric, you'd have to go even further back in time, and that was a whole different animal. And so there's no way to really correlate it, in my opinion. And I don't feel like there's a good way to correlate the 7-point rubric scores to a 10-point. So, I can't give you a good crystal ball answer as to what will get a 3 or a 4. But I would say that an 8, I feel like would be a 4, personally. And I feel like you could get an 8 using this. I've graded a couple guys in 8 push, and I've noticed whether they meant to or not, they sort of did this, and they get like a 7 because they failed to maybe have enough outside evidence, and they generally don't get this point. But like I said, I think a 7 will be passing. I'm sure a 7 will be passing. Let me rephrase that. I don't know what score it'll be, but I am positive a 7 will be passing. So there it is. Call it what you will. As I said, the man who came up with it, I will go ahead and give credit. His name is Larry Krieger. Larry Krieger calls it Plan B. As I said, being the chess fan I am, I'm going to call it the 2 Doc Gambit. But it's food for thought. And for those of you who, again, you're not getting to finish your final sentence, or you feel like you don't do an adequate job on any of the documents because you feel so pressured to get them all in there or whatever, this might be a better approach. Thank you.